I'm going to talk with you today about the evidence for how to train women, the sex and gender differences for training women, and my own recommendations. I'm going to talk about women specifically for strength and powerlifting, because in powerlifting we're split into men's and women's powerlifting, or to be inclusive for other people that may not identify as women. Some of the things I talk about are sex differences, and you can apply that to other people. So, I'm going to talk about the menstrual cycle. Not every woman has a menstrual cycle, which I'll mention. You will notice that the recommendations, the differences that I talk about, are actually quite minor, and they actually fall way down the list of priorities when you're thinking about coaching somebody. So if you don't feel like you don't fall into that category, it probably doesn't matter, because I, as a coach, would treat you personally as a human with the things that apply to you, regardless of your sex or gender identity. So with that out of the way, that's what I'm going to talk about. It's training women for strength and powerlifting specifically. The inspiration for this is this slide. If you're watching this way in the future, or you're not in the powerlifting world, then you may not have seen this. This slide started going around on social media, which was presumably from an IPF, International Powerlifting Federation, coaching course about how should a coach treat a female athlete. And it seemed a lot of other people thought this was absolutely ridiculous, and it made me think, is this the level of education that we're giving people on how to treat female athletes, women powerlifters in particular? So I want to have a look through this slide, and then I'm going to go on and talk about what the evidence actually says about if and how women should train differently. If you're a coach, I hope this is useful. If you are an athlete, if you're training for strength and powerlifting, I hope this is useful for you as well. So stick around. Let's have a look at this slide. So, how should a coach treat a female athlete? Be careful with her emotions. Obviously this is shit, because it's implying that you need to be more careful with a female athlete, a woman's emotions. It gives you very old-fashioned ideas of the kind of emotional woman, and by emotions we're talking being kind of fragile. She's sad, she's gonna cry if you're not careful with her. Absolutely ridiculous stuff. So, strong start to this slide. I think this is also funny because it implies that you don't need to be careful with men's emotions, which of course is not true. All humans have emotions, and if you're coaching someone with no regard to their emotions whatsoever, you're not a good coach and you're not going to get good results. So, emotions are important. Humans have emotions, not just women. That's absolutely ridiculous. Give her special motivation. What on earth does this mean? I don't even know. Special motive? I'm not even going to try. And I think maybe this slide was written by someone for whom English is not a first language, so maybe we'll give them that. I did think, this is maybe not English as a first language. It says IPF, but is it has this actually been ratified and looked at by the IPF and they're approving this stuff? It does say IPF instructor, and it is a woman, which is surprising as well down here. But the IPF came out with an apology, which wasn't really an apology. It said, yeah, you've just taken it the wrong way, and it was out of context. So that was pretty bad. It makes it even worse that they knew about this. They knew the course that this was from, and that this slide exists. And they said, oh yeah, it's just in context. Unless the context was, this is how not to do it. This is a load of rubbish that I've heard that is not true. And then the next slide is how, some things that are actually important. Then that just doesn't fly. Anyway, third point. Mostly females have a very high level of responsibility, so don't tell her the accurate planned weights for training. High level of responsibility? Are they the weight, or are they going to put excess pressure on themselves to hit a weight if you tell them? I don't really know what that means again. But not telling her the planned weights, advocating lying to your athletes. just lie to them about the weights. Good coaching tip. Ironically, the last point, win her trust. So lie to her and win her trust. Absolutely ridiculous. With that out of the way, that was my inspiration, because I thought, do you know what? people should know and have some good information on what the differences actually are with training women. First of all, in summary up front before we get into the rest of this video, coach the athlete in front of you, not the gender. So people are humans first before they are their gender, and the differences between genders are fairly minimal when we're talking about coaching. As you will see, I don't treat men and women any different in my coaching. There are some slight differences in programming, possibly, that would, apart from that, I don't talk to women differently to men. I don't think you should. And for the practical differences, the programming differences, or the coaching approach, either way, you should be dealing with the human in front of you first and foremost. So that is the main point. Training and programming is not fundamentally different for men and women. Men and women are more alike than they are different in their training needs. So you may see like women's programs and men's programs. Like a men's powerlifting program or a women's powerlifting program is meaningless. That is like such rubbish because there's not that much difference. I mean, if you're talking bodybuilding, yeah, there are different. It's different in your goals, which muscles you want to build and how you want to look. So there are differences there. But if you're training for the same goals, such as powerlifting, you're trying to do the same thing. Just generally getting stronger, you're trying to do the same thing. The approach is not different. Men's and women's programs are a scam. They're just marketing in that way. There are some differences, but the differences are small. They're very small in training. There are some possible differences worth considering, which I'm going to go into. One big area is the effects of the menstrual cycle, which are definitely real and they're worth considering, but even that is variable. It's not a given. So again, you will see people specifically marketing towards women, specifically marketing towards women with menstrual cycles, and advocating for like a cycle matching approach with different phases. So you do different training, you do maybe different diet even in the different phases of your menstrual cycle. That just does not play out. Like the evidence for that is non-existent. In fact, there's evidence against that. It's not just non-existent. There's evidence against that being a good idea, and it's different for different people. So like there are some things we know about the menstrual cycle, which I'm going to tell you, but it again depends. It's variable. It depends on the person. It goes back to this. It's the person in front of you, the human, not just all women in the same category. There are some differences, but there are other factors that make a much bigger difference regardless of sex or gender. So like before I think, oh, this is a woman, this is a female human, so I'm going to switch my program in one way or another, there are much more important things, namely the size of the person, the amount of muscle mass that they have, their strength, their age. This makes more difference at the extremes. So like a 35-year-old and a 25-year-old just getting started in training are probably going to experience very similar things. They're going to have very similar programs and have very similar experiences on those programs. When you get up to the more extremes of age, and particularly for women, menopause might be a thing. That's when it's going to make a big difference. But more important than that is the training age and their experience. So whether you're a complete beginner, just getting started, you've been training for a few months and years, or you are, a veteran, you're more intermediate, advanced, been training for many years. That makes the bigger difference. And of course, their preferences and beliefs. So what that person wants individually and what they believe in makes a much bigger difference than if you're just making assumptions about those things based on if they're male or female, if they're a man or a woman. That's the summary. Let's look at some evidence. So, progress and potential for women. The thing is, women gain strength and muscle at the same relative rate as men. So people are surprised by this. And I was surprised by this when I first saw this evidence. Because you think, well, men are bigger and stronger than women, so they gain, they go in the gym and they get more gains than women. Well, they don't. Relatively, women gain strength and muscle at the same rate. They might even gain even faster, especially in the upper body. There's some evidence for that. It's just that women generally have a lower starting point, so they get smaller absolute gains. So yeah, the kilograms, the pounds that lifts are going up, the kilograms of muscle that they are gaining are less, it's a smaller number, but relatively as a percentage, it's the same, it might even be quicker. And this makes sense, from a lower starting point, perhaps it's easier to get higher gains, increased gains relative to your starting point. And women generally have a lower starting point due to hormones, puberty, but that lack of testosterone that has led them to a lower starting point doesn't mean lower gains relatively. It doesn't work that way. People think, testosterone means more gains, like steroids, but there's a whole hormone system. Anyone just talking about testosterone outside of taking steroids, like huge amounts of testosterone within natural ranges, it doesn't work that way. And for women, it's very different things going on there. It doesn't mean because they've got a fraction of the testosterone that men have that they have a fraction of the potential to build strength and muscle. That's not the way it works. Complete misunderstanding. This is an image from Greg Nuckols at Stronger by Science. Let's have a look at this one. Some really findings. So higher up on this graph favours women, so it means women got better results. Lower below the line into the negative means men got better results. So you can see it's pretty much the same results, except overall women are getting better results, especially young strength gains. So strength gains when they're younger, and upper body strength gains definitely favours women. So actually, and this is relative, this is all relative gains, it actually favours women. There's a couple of fantastic articles by Stronger by Science where it summarises a lot of this information. It's got a lot of the references that I'm going to use now. Strength training for women, setting the record straight, and how sex, strength and age affect strength gains in powerlifters. So this is good. They looked at open powerlifting, which is like all the powerlifting results that you can find being attempted to put into this one database, basically, and now it's pretty ubiquitous. If you have a powerlifting competition, your results are going to get put on open powerlifting. Looked at all that data, and the first thing he did was split it by sex, male and female, and this was consistent that it's that women gain strength at a faster rate than men. So men gain strength at a rate of 0.57, women 0.92, so quite a significant difference there. It says there's a significant difference with a small effect size. That's because these are it seems like a big difference, like that's almost double. Well, it's not, because of the type of measure that we're using here, which is a Cohen's d. That's a statistical thing going on there. But he says this is in keeping with the bulk of the literature on this subject, which goes back to this article here where I've got the graph from that I just showed you, which is looking at all these studies and putting them all together to see that, oh yeah, women get about the same results, maybe better results relatively. Cool. Where are the actual differences in training? Women then, are the differences in the volume that they can do, the amount that they can recover, and the load that they're going to use. So volume, intensity, if I say load then intensity, that's what we're talking about. Well, there is maybe some evidence that women can possibly do more reps at a given percentage. So you might hear this, if you give a group of men and a group of women 70% of their 1 rep max to do reps with, the women are going to do more reps with that relative amount because they're going to fatigue slower. Maybe, there's some studies showing that. Maybe they also recover faster from training. So here is, I think I've got a graph here actually. Yeah, I've already got this study up. So you can see male athletes and controls, female athletes and controls, and the black to the grey is baseline to recovery. So after 4 and 24 hours, you see that the male athletes and the male controls are both dropped off, and then they're pretty much recovered by 48. Whereas for the female athletes, no drop off, recovered straight away. So maybe they can recover faster from training. There's a few reasons why this might be. Women generally have a high proportion of type 1 muscle fibers, the slower twitch muscle fibers, which are less fatigable. Estrogen might have a protective effect on recovery and on muscle damage. So there's a few things that are going on there. They also may benefit more from higher load training for muscle gain particularly. So for muscle gain, there's good evidence that you can use a wide range of loads, so a wide range of reps, low reps, heavier weights, or high reps, lighter weights, and gain muscle equally well. There is this one study in women comparing high reps and low reps. Let's see, I've got this study here. The high load is 80-85% 1 rep max, so the low load is 45 to 60 1 rep max, which is like single figures rep max kind of rep ranges into 20 plus reps probably, with the 45 to 60% 1 rep max. So there's a big difference there. And the higher load, the heavier, lower rep range training, they gained way more muscle, like almost 3 times the muscle, I think. Yeah, 38.8% compared to 10%. This was a crazy study where they looked at lighter, slow reps as well, like tempos, and that was terrible. But the higher load training, lower rep ranges, blew them all out of the water with the amount of muscle gain. There is a lack of studies on women in general, so it's funny that this is the one study that seems to compare high and low load training in women, and that gives us the idea that maybe actually women benefit even more from the higher load, the heavier stuff, which I think is interesting. And I mention it because there is still this belief that I think most people know is bullshit by now, that women need to do lighter loads, like for higher reps, for toning, make like long lean muscles and tone, and like it's just not a thing. You get better results using heavier loads. Obviously for everyone, men and women, heavier loads lead to more strength gains, which is pretty obvious and accepted in sports science. Usually high and low load lead to similar muscle gains, and that's the possible difference here. Greg Nuckols, in his article, said women training with higher loads, 6 to 10 rep maxes, gain way more muscle than women training with low loads, 20 to 30 rep max loads. So that's what I was just talking about. You'll notice I'm talking about these training variables. Volume possibly could do more reps at any given percentage. Recovery, maybe they recover faster from training. Load, they may benefit more from higher load training, for muscle gain in particular. So there's a lot of doubt in all these things. There's a possibility for each of these things that there's a small difference. So it's a small thing to bear in mind if you don't usually train female athletes, or alternatively, if you are a female athlete and you're getting a program from a coach, and the rep work that you're doing, like the back downs, seem very easy and you can do more reps than your male counterparts doing the same training, maybe there's something going on there. Maybe you can recover faster, maybe there is this effect kind of happening. But not a huge difference, you'll notice. Now, one thing that does make a difference in training women, and if you are a woman training, is the menstrual cycle. Not all women have menstrual cycles, not all people that have menstrual cycles are women, but if you have a menstrual cycle, this affects you. If you are on a contraceptive that stops your menstrual cycle, then this does not necessarily affect you, and there are some other things I'm going to talk about to do with that. What is the impact of the menstrual cycle? So people that have cycles, have periods, will tell you that it makes a difference, mostly. Objectively, does it reduce your performance? And the science is all pointing in the direction that it doesn't. So the effect of the menstrual cycle is insufficient to justify phase-based testing or training. That's what this study says. That was a study on rugby league athletes, female rugby league athletes. So it's pretty convincing. It said minimal influence of the menstrual cycle or hormonal contraceptives on performance in female rugby league athletes. So it didn't have much difference. Didn't make much difference there. Some very minor differences. What they're saying is it's insufficient to justify phase-based testing. Not necessary to change the testing or training that you're doing. This other study, no difference in performance in the different menstrual phases. So they looked at performance in the different phases of the menstrual cycle and found that it had no influence on physical performance in physically active women. What quote have I got from this? No difference in physical performance between the follicular phase and the luteal phase. However, menstrual flow intensity and perception of cycle interference demonstrated a decrease in the time to exhaustion. What does that last sentence mean? All right, because this is getting interesting now. So the women that said that their flow was heavy and they perceived that it interfered with their training, then you did see an effect on the time to exhaustion. So they had worse results in the test that they did in this study here. So believing that it affects your performance, it did affect their performance. And if you have a heavy flow, then it's going to be perhaps uncomfortable. If you have cramps and things that are associated with that, is it going to affect your performance? Of course it's going to affect your performance. So this is not just, I'm not saying it's all in your head, but it is possible to be in that phase of your cycle and it not affect your performance whatsoever. That's what the science says. It doesn't look like it makes much, if any, difference on your performance. However, there is the other side to this that I'm hinting at here, that is the subjective side of it. Here's a good review. Looking at the menstrual cycle, characteristics, hormonal contraceptive use, and perceptions of related effects in resistance training athletes, in lifting athletes. Some quotes. The menstrual cycle symptoms are widespread and for some can be quite severe and limiting, so it can affect performance, it can limit performance. Most participants perceived that their menstrual cycle had a negative effect on their performance and that their menstrual cycle can cause reductions in training load or workout program adherence, although most competitive level athletes did not withdraw from competition due to their menstrual cycle symptoms. So on the one hand, people are saying, you need to match up with your cycle, do your heaviest training at a particular time in your menstrual cycle and not at another. So plan your heaviest week and do the most training in your follicular phase, and then when you're in your luteal phase, you need to take a deload and drop it off, in that premenstrual period of your training, of your cycle. You need to change your training. On the other hand, the science seems to say, that seems like bullshit. It seems like that's not the way it works at all. However, and that's true, however, there is the added piece that obviously if you are premenstrual and you feel like shit, or you're on your period and you're having cramps and you feel tired and there are all these other differences subjectively to you, and someone tells you, it's just in your head, science says it doesn't affect your performance, you're going to be pretty pissed off at that person, I imagine. So that's not what I'm telling you. The person telling you need to line up your training with your cycle is also lying to you, and I think that is equally harmful, because if someone's telling you there's a big difference in your performance, well, guess what? Then there's going to be a big difference in your performance, and you're not going to be able to perform as well at those periods of time where they're telling you shouldn't be able to perform as well, so they're stealing gains from you. So in summary, what I'm trying to tell you is, if you feel fine in whatever phase of your cycle that you're in, then there's no reason that you can't do your normal training. If you feel that your cycle severely affects you in the premenstrual and menstrual periods when you're on your period, then aligning your training to that is important. And if you're a coach and you're coaching women, this is the question to ask, how is your cycle and how does it affect you? And it goes back to this: listening to the person that is in front of you, listen to the athlete in front of you, don't make assumptions based on gender. So I hear people saying, hey, if your coach is not tracking your menstrual cycle, you need a new coach. They're rubbish. It's that's not the way at all. If all this evidence points to lining up with the menstrual cycle, what did they say? It's insufficient. The effects are insufficient to justify phase-based training. It's not a good idea to do phase-based training. Your training should also already be flexible enough and also regulated enough that if something is affecting your performance on the day, because there's other things. It's not just your menstrual cycle that affects your performance. You could have a bad night's sleep. You could be particularly stressed at work or for something else, with your kids or your family or a relationship, or you've eaten less than you normally do. Whatever it is, your program should be flexible enough to regulate for that, and if you're not feeling as good, if your performance isn't as high, then you do a bit less, and vice versa. That should already be built in, and that should be sufficient to handle the differences that the menstrual cycle will make to your performance. With the exception, if you know that you feel absolutely shit and you suffer really badly with cramps or anything else at a particular point in your training cycle, then it is absolutely fine and recommended to plan for that and reduce training for that time. And if it's so bad that you literally have to take a deload for 1 week every month to manage that, then that's better than having an unplanned every month week of poor performance when you're expecting it to be better. Like that's a pretty silly thing to do. So I feel like I've hammered this a little bit, but I really want to make the point that the menstrual cycle is not, what did I say up here? What did I say? It's not a given for all, it's variable. Okay, so it's not a death sentence that your performance will be reduced at a specific point and you have to plan your hard training only for one particular point in your cycle. You have to take a break for another point in your cycle. That is not a given whatsoever. However, it is real and the effects are real, so if you suffer with it, you should plan for that also. And if you're a coach, you should ask this question: what is your cycle like and how does it affect you? Do you feel like you need to take a break? Do you feel like you need that to be incorporated and accounted for in your training, in your programming, in your planning? Probably also worth mentioning that my programs are variable and they account for differences in your performance for other things that will probably account for the differences in your menstrual cycle, unless you have a big, unless it's a big deal that you need to tell me about. You do not need to assume I need to, in an initial consultation with a client, tell me all about your menstrual cycle. Give me your logs and dates and things so I can plan for this immediately. That is not the way. That's not what the evidence points to. Okay, moving on, because I feel like I've talked about that the most, but this is probably the biggest thing to talk about on this subject. Related to menstrual cycle, contraceptives. Does taking the pill or any other hormonal contraceptive reduce your gains? The evidence says no. Let me get rid of some of these tabs. Far too many tabs. Let's get rid of all of them. Okay. Study number 1 does not affect muscle strength, thickness, fibre size or composition on a 12-week training study. There we go. That's one study. Hormonal contraceptive use does not affect strength, endurance or body composition. There's another 10-week study. Strength gains and hypertrophy are not significantly different between those taking contraception and those with a natural cycle, but another 10-week study. And a meta-analysis here says that, let me get my quote, naturally menstruating women may perform slightly better, but the typical effect is likely to be trivial. Okay, so in some of these studies, there's a hint that naturally menstruating women perform slightly better than if you are on contraception, but it's trivial. The difference is tiny. If there is a difference, it's tiny. It's not worth thinking about. And do you know what? Guess what? If you're on a contraceptive, it's probably for other reasons than your training, right? So this tells me that it is not worth coming off your contraceptive just to get a performance increase, because you might not get one. It might not be there. And if it makes your periods more manageable, your cycle more manageable, that is one reason. You're not dealing with these things. It's probably better for your training overall, in the kind of grand scheme of things. And you're probably on a contraceptive for other reasons if you actually want it to stop you getting pregnant, People fucking forget about that. Yeah, people talking about contraceptives and you need to come off it and have a natural cycle because it's ruining your health or your fitness. It's not. The evidence says it is not. But these people forget that there's another reason to be on a contraceptive. People's gym performance is not the number one thing in their life most of the time. So there we go. Loads of studies that contraceptive use is not a big deal. A little bit extra is that it seems to be in generation 2 or 3 contraceptives and above. I think there's generation 4 now. Seems to be no difference in performance, which makes sense. Like generation 1 contraceptives were higher in hormones. Estrogen, I think, higher estrogen content in generation 1 contraceptives, which have more of an effect. They get away with using less now in the more modern generations, so they have less of an effect on you. Good to know. Finally, menopause. This is related to a menstrual cycle. It is the ending of a menstrual cycle. It's a thing that affects women, people with cycles. How does that affect someone going through menopause? Again, there is a subjective component to this, that there are particular challenges and things going on for a woman going through menopause that are worth considering if you are coaching them, or in fact if you are that person going through menopause. However, science says no difference in muscle damage in postmenopausal women compared to premenopausal women in well-trained women, which is good to know. However, there's another study, and this study was looking at HRT, so hormone therapy in postmenopausal women, and it found that there was greater muscle damage in postmenopausal women, but it was attenuated. The effect of that was gotten rid of. It was solved by being on hormone replacement therapy. So that is good to know as well. So if you're trained, maybe there's no difference when you're going through menopause in muscle damage. Maybe there is, but it's attenuated if you're on hormone therapy. So those are things to know. Very little research on women in menopause and lifting and training, unfortunately. So there we go. Let's go back to this slide. Can we do better than this? Yes. It goes back to my first point. Always coach the person in front of you, the human, treat them as an individual. All these things that I said, it's fairly minor. Possibly there's a bit of difference here. Maybe there's a bit of difference here. Menstrual cycle maybe makes a bit of difference, but it depends on the person. You have to ask them. You have to see what their particular experience is, what their individual experience is. That should be the primary thing that you do. And if you are not a coach, if you're an athlete listening to this, don't listen to someone telling you that this is the way it is for women, and women need to train this way or that way, different to men. That's probably bullshit. You need to do your heaviest training at this point in your cycle and deload at this other point in your cycle. That's bullshit as well. Think about how you are as an individual. Coach the athlete in front of you first, not the gender. All these differences pale in comparison to the differences between individuals. The range of differences in men, the range of differences in women are pretty huge. There's a massive amount of overlap between men and women. You're much better looking at the individual response and the individual experience and these other factors that I talked about before you even consider sex and gender differences between men and women. Alright, are those useful? Whether you're coaching women, or you are in fact a woman, a female athlete yourself, I hope this was useful. Thanks for watching.